The silence in the boardroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop onto the polished mahogany table. Sylvia Croft sat perfectly still, her hands neatly folded over a stack of corporate documents. She did not blink. She did not offer a sympathetic smile. She simply pushed a single sheet of paper across the smooth surface toward me. I looked down at the paper. The numbers were printed in bold black ink, completely devoid of any human empathy. My salary, which had been $115,000 annually for the past 6 years, was being slashed to $46,000. It was a staggering reduction, an undeniable insult wrapped in corporate terminology. Sylvia called it a strategic realignment. I called it a targeted assassination of my career. I am Donovan Vance. I am 55 years old, and I have spent the last 30 years of my life mastering the complex world of industrial chemical formulations. I am a father to a 15-year-old boy named Julian, who suffers from severe cystic fibrosis. Every single day of my life revolves around ensuring Julian gets the specialized treatments, the expensive medications, and the dedicated care he needs to simply breathe. My medical insurance and my income were the only things keeping my family afloat. Sylvia knew this. The entire management team at Orasan Solutions knew this. They calculated that a desperate, 55-year-old father with monumental medical expenses would never dare to quit, regardless of the humiliation. They assumed I would simply swallow my pride, sign the paper, and accept a 60% pay cut just to keep my health insurance active. They were wrong. They were so fundamentally, catastrophically wrong, but I did not let them see it. Not yet. I stared at the paper for a long time, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for the other executives in the room. There were 3 other vice presidents sitting around the table, all of them avoiding my gaze. They were cowards, hiding behind Sylvia's ruthless ambition. Over the past 12 months, they had systematically frozen me out of my own department. I used to run the entire industrial sanitation division. I was the one who took a failing department with only $4.5 million in revenue and transformed it into a juggernaut, generating $28.4 million annually. I built their success with my own hands. But then, the subtle changes began. My laboratory access was restricted to standard business hours. My requisitions for new testing equipment were mysteriously delayed or denied entirely. Meetings that pertained to my formulations were scheduled without me. When minor quality control issues arose in manufacturing, issues caused by their own cost-cutting measures, they placed the blame entirely on my shoulders. It was a classic corporate maneuver to establish a paper trail of alleged incompetence. They wanted me gone, but they did not want to pay my severance package. So they engineered this impossible situation. "Take your time, Donovan," Sylvia said, her voice dripping with artificial patience. "We understand this is a difficult transition, but Orasan Solutions must adapt to the shifting market dynamics. We hope you will choose to remain part of the team." I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply folded the paper, placed it in my jacket pocket, and looked her directly in the eyes. "I will review the terms," I said quietly. Then, I stood up and walked out of the room. I walked down the long, sterile hallway of the corporate headquarters, my footsteps echoing against the tile floor. My heart was pounding, but my mind was incredibly clear. I knew exactly what game they were playing. More importantly, I knew exactly how to destroy them. You see, there was a massive, fatal flaw in their master plan. They thought they owned everything I had ever created. They assumed that because I was on their payroll, every brilliant idea that sprang from my mind belonged to Orasan Solutions. But they had not read my original employment contract carefully enough, and they had absolutely no idea what I had been doing in the basement of my own home for the past 4 years. When my son Julian was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, I realized that my standard salary would never be enough to cover the long-term costs of his care. So, I started working nights. I converted my sprawling basement into a state-of-the-art chemical testing laboratory. I purchased every single beaker, every centrifuge, every spectrometer, and every raw chemical with my own personal funds. I kept meticulous, time-stamped receipts for every single purchase. I documented every hour I spent down there, completely off the clock, completely isolated from Orasan's corporate campus. It was in that basement, surrounded by the hum of my own equipment, that I developed a revolutionary cold water enzymatic sanitization complex. Traditional industrial cleaners required hot water to activate the enzymes, which cost massive manufacturing plants hundreds of thousands of dollars in energy bills. My formulation activated perfectly at normal room temperature, effectively destroying 99.9% of all pathogens while saving clients a fortune in heating costs. It was the holy grail of industrial sanitation, and Orasan Solutions had been secretly implementing an inferior, derivative version of my concepts, thinking I would never notice or fight back. They were currently using formulations that were dangerously close to my proprietary designs, assuming corporate immunity. I drove home that evening, the engine of my car humming a steady rhythm. The sunset cast long, dark shadows across the highway. I thought about Julian. I thought about the endless hospital visits, the breathing treatments, the fear that gripped my chest every time he had a coughing fit. I was not just fighting for my pride, I was fighting for my son's life. When I pulled into the driveway of my suburban home, the house was quiet. Julian was in his room, resting after a long day. I walked straight past the kitchen, opened the heavy door leading to the basement, and descended the wooden stairs into my sanctuary. The lab smelled faintly of ozone and sterile surfaces. I booted up my encrypted computer server. I had gigabytes of video footage showing me developing the formulas, with Julian occasionally sitting in the corner doing his homework. I had notebooks filled with chemical equations, all dated and witnessed. I had everything I needed to prove independent creation. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had saved months ago. It was the direct line for Gideon Ross, one of the most ruthless and brilliant patent attorneys in the state. "Gideon," I said when he answered. "It's Donovan Vance. We need to file immediately. They just made their move." Gideon Ross did not waste time with pleasantries. He was a man who understood the precise intersection of corporate law and biochemical engineering. "Bring me everything," Gideon said through the phone, his voice sharp and focused. "Every receipt, every time-stamped video, every page of your laboratory notebooks. If we are going to file under Title 35, United States Code, Section 271, we need absolute, undeniable proof of independent creation. I want to see you in my office at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." I spent the entire night organizing the evidence. I packed 3 heavy cardboard boxes with the physical documentation of my life's work. I included the original receipts for the high-pressure liquid chromatography machine I had bought, used from a university surplus sale. I included the invoices for the raw quaternary ammonium compounds I had ordered directly to my home address. Most importantly, I included the high-definition video logs that clearly showed the date, the time, and the location of my experiments. In several videos, Julian could be seen in the background, a small 15-year-old boy working on his algebra homework while his father revolutionized industrial chemistry. These videos were undeniable proof that the work was done off company time, off company property, and without a single cent of company resources. When I arrived at Gideon's downtown office the next morning, the city was just waking up. Gideon's conference room overlooked the skyline, a fitting battleground for the war we were about to start. He poured us both black coffee and began reviewing the documents. For 3 hours, the only sounds in the room were the rustling of paper, the clicking of his keyboard, and the occasional hum of the coffee machine. Gideon meticulously cross-referenced my employment contract with Orasan Solutions. They used a standard boilerplate intellectual property clause, Gideon finally said, looking up with a predatory grin. "It claims ownership of anything you create using company resources or during company time. But your documentation clearly establishes that you used neither. Furthermore, because they systematically reduced your laboratory access. Over the past 12 months, they inadvertently strengthened our case. They essentially forced you to work independently. Donovan, this is an ironclad defense. We are going to file 3 separate patents today." The first patent covered the cold water enzymatic sanitization complex. The second patent detailed a unique, biodegradable surfactant system that prevented chemical buildup in industrial pipes. The third patent secured the specific pH buffering technique that allowed the chemicals to remain stable in extreme temperature fluctuations. Gideon worked with incredible speed. We paid the expedited filing fees, securing our priority dates. By the time I left his office, I was no longer just an employee fighting a pay cut. I was the sole owner of the most valuable intellectual property in the industrial sanitation sector. The next phase of my plan required immense patience. I had to return to Orasan Solutions and play the role of the defeated, desperate father. I walked into the office on Monday morning wearing a slightly wrinkled suit, my shoulders slumped, my expression carefully crafted to convey quiet desperation. I saw Sylvia Croft in the hallway. She offered me a patronizing nod, clearly believing she had won. I gave her a weak, submissive smile in return. I needed them to feel completely secure in their victory while I set the final trap. During my lunch break, I walked to my car, drove to a quiet park a few miles away, and made a highly confidential phone call. I dialed the direct line of Elias Thorne. Elias was the Senior Vice President of Research and Development at Omnichem Dynamics, the largest and most aggressive competitor to Orasan Solutions. Elias and I had met at several industry conferences over the years. We shared a mutual respect for genuine scientific innovation, something that was entirely lacking at Orasan. "Donovan Vance," Elias answered, sounding genuinely surprised. "I haven't heard from you since the symposium in Chicago. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Elias," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional, "I am currently exploring new opportunities. More importantly, I have recently secured independent patent pending status on a revolutionary cold water enzymatic sanitization complex. It reduces heating costs for industrial clients by over 40% while maintaining a 99.9% pathogen kill rate. I own the intellectual property entirely, and I am looking for the right corporate partner to bring it to the global market." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in Elias's head. He knew exactly what this meant. If Omnichem Dynamics acquired this technology, they would instantly dominate the market and completely obliterate Orasan Solutions. "Donovan," Elias said, his voice lowering to a serious, hushed tone, "are you telling me that Orasan does not own this formulation? Because if you are telling the truth, this changes the entire landscape of our industry. When can we meet?" "Tonight," I replied, "at the private dining room in the Oakwood Hotel. We have a lot to discuss." That evening, I presented my findings to Elias. I showed him the redacted testing data, the efficiency metrics, and the environmental impact reports. I did not reveal the exact chemical formulas, but the performance data was enough to leave him speechless. Elias immediately recognized the magnitude of the breakthrough. He understood that my formulations were not just incremental improvements, they were a complete paradigm shift. By the end of the week, I had a formal offer letter from Omnichem Dynamics. They offered me the position of Executive Director of Advanced Formulations. The starting salary was $200,000 a year, plus a comprehensive executive health benefits package that would cover every single one of Julian's medical expenses with zero deductibles. Furthermore, they agreed to a licensing structure for my patents. Omnichem would pay me an additional $20,000 every single month for the exclusive right to manufacture my formulas. It was the kind of victory that most people only dream about. But I was not finished. I had secured my family's future, but I still had a score to settle with the people who had tried to destroy me. Orasan Solutions had attempted to exploit my son's illness to force me into financial servitude. They had insulted my intelligence, stolen my dignity, and tried to rob me of my rightful earnings. Now, it was time to drop the hammer. The weekend passed with agonizing slowness. I spent Saturday helping Julian with his breathing treatments, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. Knowing that I had secured his medical coverage gave me a profound sense of peace. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of financial anxiety was gone. On Sunday, I meticulously ironed my best suit. I polished my shoes until they gleamed. I prepared a very special manila folder, placing crisp copies of the filed patent applications, the Omnichem offer letter, and a formally drafted cease and desist order inside. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, clear sky. I drove to the Orasan Solutions headquarters, parked in my usual spot, and walked through the glass doors with a posture I had not held in months. I did not go to my small, isolated office. I walked directly to the executive suite on the top floor. The receptionist, a young woman who usually ignored me, looked up in surprise as I bypassed her desk and headed straight for the main conference room. Sylvia Croft was holding the weekly operations meeting. The same three vice presidents were sitting around the table, discussing supply chain logistics and cost-cutting measures. When I pushed the heavy oak doors open, the conversation stopped instantly. Four heads snapped toward me. Sylvia's eyes narrowed into sharp, angry slits. "Donovan," Sylvia said, her tone dripping with corporate authority and blatant disrespect. "You are interrupting an executive meeting. If you have made a decision regarding the salary realignment, you can leave the signed paperwork with my assistant. Otherwise, I expect you to return to your desk immediately." I did not apologize. I did not step back. I walked slowly and deliberately to the head of the table, pulling out an empty leather chair and sitting directly across from her. I placed my briefcase on the polished mahogany surface. The three vice presidents exchanged nervous glances. They were accustomed to employees shrinking in Sylvia's presence, not challenging her in front of an audience. "I have made a decision, Sylvia," I said, my voice perfectly calm, completely devoid of the desperation she expected to hear. "But I will not be signing your paperwork. Instead, I am here to discuss the illegal integration of my proprietary intellectual property into Orasan's manufacturing process." Sylvia let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. "Your intellectual property? Donovan, please do not embarrass yourself. You are an employee of this company. Every formula, every chemical tweak, every thought you have while on our payroll belongs to Orasan Solutions. It is standard contract law." I smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who had already won the war before the other side even realized a battle had begun. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the thick manila folder. I opened it and began sliding documents across the table. "Actually, Sylvia, according to Title 35, United States Code, Section 271, patent infringement occurs when anyone makes, uses, offers to sell, or sells any patented invention without authority," I explained, leaning forward. "These are three federally filed patent applications, establishing my absolute ownership of the cold water enzymatic sanitization complex, the biodegradable surfactant system, and the specific pH buffering technique. The priority dates are secured, the documentation proving independent creation, using my own equipment, in my own home, completely outside of business hours, is bulletproof." I watched as one of the vice presidents, the head of legal compliance, picked up the documents. His eyes scanned the technical specifications and the official federal filing stamps. I could physically see the color drain from his face. He understood exactly what he was looking at. He recognized the exact chemical complexes that Orasan had just begun integrating into their new flagship product line. "What is this?" Sylvia demanded, her voice suddenly losing its authoritative edge. She snatched a paper from the vice president's hands. "You developed this while working for us. We own this." "Read the employment contract, Sylvia," I replied, pointing a finger at the table. "You own what I create on company time with company resources. But you spent the last year restricting my lab access. You pushed me out of the corporate facilities. You forced me to innovate on my own time, in my own basement laboratory, using equipment I purchased with my own money. You created the exact legal loophole I needed to secure these patents independently." The silence in the room returned, but this time it was thick with absolute terror. The head of legal compliance finally spoke, his voice trembling slightly. "Sylvia, if he holds the priority dates for these formulations, and we are currently using derivative versions in our manufacturing plant, we are actively committing federal patent infringement. The liability exposure is catastrophic." "It is worse than catastrophic," I corrected him gently, "because I am not here to negotiate a licensing deal with Orasan Solutions. I am here to inform you that I am formally resigning, effective immediately, and I am leaving this room to accept the position of Executive Director of Advanced Formulations at Omnichem Dynamics." When I said the name of their biggest competitor, it was as if a bomb had detonated in the center of the table. Omnichem Dynamics was the massive industry titan that Orasan had been desperately trying to compete against. Sylvia physically recoiled, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster unfolding before her. "You cannot do this," Sylvia whispered, her previous arrogance completely shattered. "Donovan, be reasonable. We can restructure your compensation. We can restore your original salary of $115,000. We can even offer you a promotion to senior vice president. We need those formulations." "You do not get it, Sylvia," I said, standing up and buttoning my suit jacket. "This is not a negotiation. You looked at a 55-year-old father with a sick child and you saw an easy target. You thought my desperate need for medical insurance meant you could humiliate me, steal my dignity, and cut my pay by 60% without consequence. You thought you held all the cards, but you were playing the wrong game." I pulled one final document from the folder, a formally drafted legal notice. "This is a cease and desist order, drafted by Gideon Ross, one of the most aggressive intellectual property attorneys in the country. Orasan Solutions has exactly 48 hours to completely halt the manufacturing, distribution, and sale of any product utilizing my patented enzymatic formulations. If a single gallon of that chemical leaves your warehouse after Wednesday morning, my attorneys will file a federal lawsuit for willful patent infringement, seeking treble damages and an immediate injunction." The legal vice president buried his face in his hands. He knew the company was doomed. The new product line was the only thing keeping Orasan's quarterly revenue afloat. Without it, their stock price would plummet, their clients would abandon them, and bankruptcy would become a mathematical certainty. "Furthermore," I continued, looking directly into Sylvia's panicked eyes, "I will be notifying the board of directors regarding your deliberate mishandling of this situation. I will explain to them how your petty, vindictive management style directly resulted in the loss of the company's most valuable technological asset, handing total market dominance to your biggest competitor. I believe the legal term for your actions is a breach of fiduciary duty. I am sure the shareholders will be fascinated to hear how you destroyed the company just to save a few $1,000s on my salary." Sylvia sat frozen in her chair, her professional demeanor completely destroyed. There were no more threats. There was no more corporate doublespeak. There was only the stark, horrifying realization that her own arrogance had engineered her complete professional ruin. I did not wait for a response. I packed my empty briefcase, turned my back on the executives, and walked out of the conference room. I did not look back. I took the elevator down to the lobby, handed my corporate security badge to the confused receptionist, and walked out into the bright morning sunlight. The air had never tasted so clean. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from Orasan Solutions for the last time. That evening, I took Julian to his favorite steakhouse to celebrate. He noticed the change in my demeanor immediately. For the first time in his life, he saw his father sitting across the table without the heavy, invisible burden of financial anxiety pressing down on my shoulders. I told him about the new job at Omnichem Dynamics. I told him about the massive new laboratory I would be running, the brilliant scientists I would be working with, and the incredible medical benefits that would cover everything he needed without question. Julian smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that made every single late night in that basement laboratory entirely worth it. The fallout at Orasan Solutions was swift, brutal, and entirely predictable. By Wednesday afternoon, panic had consumed their corporate headquarters. Realizing that they could not legally manufacture their flagship products without facing catastrophic federal lawsuits, production ground to a complete halt. They attempted to revert to their old, outdated chemical formulas, but the market had already moved on. Clients who had been promised the efficiency of cold water sanitization were furious when their shipments were suddenly canceled. Word spread through the industry with lightning speed. The board of directors at Orasan convened an emergency meeting. When the legal team explained that Sylvia Croft's aggressive salary reduction strategy had directly caused the loss of the patents, the board's reaction was merciless. Sylvia was unceremoniously terminated before the end of the week. She was escorted out of the building by security, carrying a small cardboard box containing her personal belongings, completely stripped of her power and reputation. The 3 vice presidents who had enabled her were quietly asked to resign shortly after. Meanwhile, my transition to Omnichem Dynamics was seamless and incredibly fulfilling. Elias Thorne proved to be a visionary leader who genuinely valued scientific innovation over petty office politics. I was given complete control over the Advanced Formulations Division. I had a team of 20 brilliant chemists, state-of-the-art equipment, and an essentially unlimited research budget. We integrated my patents into Omnichem's global supply chain, and the results were staggering. Our market share exploded, capturing the massive clients that Orasan was rapidly bleeding out. Every month, like clockwork, the $20,000 licensing fee was deposited directly into a special trust fund I had established for Julian. His health stabilized beautifully under the care of the world-class specialists we could now easily afford. He started thinking about college, talking about studying biochemistry to follow in my footsteps. The fear that had defined our lives for so long was completely gone, replaced by a profound sense of security and possibility. 18 months later, the final chapter of the saga concluded. Orasan Solutions, crippled by the loss of their product line and facing massive debt, officially filed for bankruptcy. Their stock was practically worthless. Elias Thorne called me into his spacious corner office one afternoon, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "Donovan," Elias said, pouring us both a glass of incredibly expensive scotch. "I just got off the phone with the liquidators. Omnichem Dynamics has officially purchased the remaining manufacturing assets of Orasan Solutions for pennies on the dollar. We essentially bought your old company using the profits generated by your patents." I took a sip of the scotch, savoring the complex, smoky flavor. The irony was almost poetic. The very company that had tried to crush me, that had tried to exploit my son's illness for a minor financial gain, had been completely devoured by the consequences of their own actions. I was now effectively the boss of the very facilities where I had once been humiliated. Sometimes, the universe delivers justice in the most spectacular ways. They thought they were dealing with a desperate, aging employee who had no options and no fight left in him. They failed to realize that when you push a father to the absolute brink, when you threaten his ability to care for his child, you do not create a victim, you create an unstoppable force. I did not just survive their corporate assassination attempt. I dismantled their entire empire, secured my family's legacy, and walked away with the keys to the kingdom.